Romans. Proverbs. We had just about finished chapter 18. We have a couple of verses there, and then we'll pick up, go as far as we can in 19. I have more than enough notes for today. So, all right, chapter 18, verse 22. He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. This is an interesting verse. If you go back to chapter 8, verse 35. Remember, chapter 8 was was wisdom speaking. And here in verse 35, wisdom is speaking. It says, and whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. And if you compare that with what we just read, right, verse 22, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. It's just finding a good wife is wise, is what it says. It's part of wisdom, finding a good wife. And then obtains favor from the Lord, right? It's a gift from God. It's interesting. If we go to Proverbs 31, of course, is the whole thing about the virtuous woman. Turn there a minute just to Proverbs 31, the introduction to that. In verse 10, verse 10 is that whole section that says, who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies, et cetera, et cetera. But it's finding a good wife is wise, and finding one is a gift from God. It's not.
Mine doesn't say good. Mine just says wife.
It depends on the translation, actually. No, honestly, this is funny.
Mine says excellent.
Mine says
Yeah,
excellent.
worthy.
See, some of them don't say anything. They just say find a wife. Yeah, that's depending on your translation. And it's that way back in the old manuscripts, supposedly. Some of the old manuscripts have good wife, some of them have just wife. So I'm not getting into that. All right. We'll actually talk about this more because there's a couple of verses here on wives. Verse 23. Poor man uses entreaties, but the rich man answers roughly. What's interesting here is, the poor man uses entreaties, the rich man answers roughly. The way we actually think about the poor, we think about the poor would be the rough man, right? The rich man, he's the one, he doesn't need to speak roughly, but in actual practice, what we find that the opposite is true. The other thing I would say here is that it doesn't matter whether you're poor or rich. If all you think about is money, you got a problem, right? The poor, who all they're worried about is money, 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 is just as bad off as the rich, because all they think about is money, money, money. The poor use entreaties, the rich man answers roughly. Verse 24, a man who has friends must himself be friendly, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. This is interesting just because we've heard this before, but the first part is also interesting. A man who has friends must himself be friendly. What did yours say?
Comes to ruin.
Comes to ruin.
Yeah, I was like,
Mine says a man of many companions.
Yeah, what actually is being said here, Debbie is closer to what it actually should say. Because it really is saying a man who has friends must himself be friendly. In other words, you have to buy your friends with your friendliness, right? And if all you're doing is trying to keep people happy, you're going to come to ruin. That's really what the verse is trying to say. It doesn't come across, and certainly in my translation. He's paying for his friendship in some way. And then this last one, right, that we've heard, there's a friend who sticks closer than a brother. It takes us back to 17:17, which is just a key verse, right? A friend loves at all times. A brother is born of adversity, right? And we use this a lot when we talk about Jesus, right, as our friend who sticks closer than a brother. But the whole point of it is there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. A real friend is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. A real friend is the one that loves at all times. That's what it really is trying to say. And of course, the great example of that is Jesus. Verse 19, chapter 19 then. Better is the poor who walks in his integrity than one who is perverse in his lips and is a fool. right? Better to walk in integrity, but the one who is perverse in his lips, he speaks wickedly, he speaks, unrighteously, right? See, a lot of times in these verses, we talk about the poor, right? And we talk about the fool, but the real issue here is integrity, right? Or the way that you are speaking perversely. He's really saying what's important is that you have integrity, not whether you're poor or not poor. The point is integrity is important, and not speaking wickedly is important. Verse 2. Also, it is not good for a soul to be without knowledge, and he sins who hastens with his feet. So this is another one where the translation gives us trouble. Anybody else have something else from verse 2? Just first part.
It isn't good to be ignorant.
Nothing else?
Desire without knowledge is not good.
Yeah, that's more better. So what it's really trying to say here is passion without knowledge, zeal without knowledge. In other words, if you're devoted to the wrong thing, right? So it's not good for the soul to be without knowledge. It's not good for the word soul there is the one that gives us trouble in the translation. But it's not good for your passion to be without knowledge. It's not good for you to be, and it's connected to the next one, right? And he sins who hastens with his feet, right? He's hurrying, and he misses the mark, right? That's what sins is. He misses the mark. He misses the way. He's off the path because he's hastening, because he's following his passion and not following what's real and what's true.
So with this knowledge, when it says knowledge there, would that knowledge be basically the word, the Bible? And we're not just talking about.
Yeah. When it's used here, when knowledge is used here, it's always used in that sense.
I would say all thrust, no vector.
Yeah, right. After we've got that. Verse 3. The foolishness of a man twists his way, and his heart frets against the Lord. Notice it's the foolishness of a man. His foolishness twists his way, right? In other words, he's messed up because of his own foolishness. He's messing himself up. And yet his heart frets against the Lord. He blames God. He rages. So this is just people today, right? They mess up, and then they go and gripe at God and say, why have you let this happen? Well, because you're an idiot, right? Because you did a dumb thing, right? Because you did not follow my principles. It's exactly what it's saying. Verse 4. Wealth makes many friends, but the poor is separated from his friends. So, for this one, outside the covenant community, this is true, right? I mean, people flock towards the wealthy, and when there's a poor person, we separate ourselves from them. I guess what hit me in this is this true of us also? Is this true of us within the faith community? Sure. Right? And, you got to be asking yourself, who's in your circle of friends? Who are your relationships? We're a bunch of white middle-class people in here, right? I'm not sure that's the way God wants it to be. Wealth makes many friends, the poor is separated from his friend. I often wonder if someone with real need came into our class, would we be annoyed that all we're talking about is their need? All we're talking about is maybe we should take up a collection and help them. Would that be annoying to us, or would that be, oh, wow, what an opportunity we have to serve? Then,
Hard question. I think I know the answer. I don't like the answer.
yeah, I don't like the answer either. I think I can remember a class that we were in years ago that I taught, and there was a couple who every week it was something else. Rent was due. The bill is not going to be paid, whatever it is. And I remember feeling, and again, going back to verse 7, brother is born for adversity, right? I mean, we're put into this class to help others and not be annoyed by them. I just, it's just challenging to me.
You know, we did that a number of years ago in this class. We had a couple that had, before you were teaching.
I messed it up.
They had now they had a financial difficulty and we all got together and pitched in to help them, but it was a great blessing to us, but I think they had a hard time dealing with it because of the, I guess, feeling of debt that was put on them.
Mhm.
But you're right. It's an
Somehow
awkward
the
situation.
dynamic of that is wrong,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Why would they feel
Exactly.
debt? Why wouldn't they feel, oh, I'm part of this family and my family is helping me? It's both sides of that dynamic is broken. So good. Okay.
You know, Rich, I read an article several, I want to say it's probably like 10 years ago. There was a church that was predominantly African American in the Norfolk area, and what they were doing made the news. They were literally paying people's debts off. The thing was, when one of them got their debt paid off, they joined the group that was paying debts off, if you will, and it was actually really interesting to see. It wasn't just helping the poor; it was helping the poor out of
Get out of the situation they're in. Mhm.
Pay it forward church.
it.
I just don't know how we get from here to there either, right? So I'm open to ideas. Verse 5. A false witness will not go unpunished, right? And he who speaks lies will not escape. We've talked about lying several times, right? But just don't always think about lying as just not telling the truth, right? It's also, not telling all the truth, or the white lie, or the mask that you wear so people don't see really what's going on. All of that stuff. It says, he who speaks lies will not escape. Verse 6. Many entreat the favor of a nobility, and every man is a friend of one who gives gifts. Keep going, verse 7. All the brothers of the poor hate him. How much more do his friends go far from him? He may pursue them with words, and yet they abandon him. There's a theme here, yes? Asking for help is not wrong if you have a need, right? But verse 6b kind of implies that this friendship is bought. Every man is a friend to one who gives gifts, right? That's not what we're talking about here. But even his brothers, and so this is the thing, right? Even the brothers of the poor hate him. How much more do the friends go far from him? This is a problem we have as humans. At the end it says, he may pursue them with words, yet mine says, yet they abandon him. It really says that they are not any longer. In other words, they are not his friends if they abandon him. They are not his friends if they do not respond. They're not that friend closer than a brother. They are not that friend who loves at all times. All right, verse 8 starts a new section on wisdom at home, etc. Verse 8, he who gets wisdom loves his soul. He who keeps understanding will find good. He who acquires, mine says, he who gets wisdom loves his soul. Did yours say something else?
Sense.
Say sense. He who gets sense. Yeah. The word actually is the word heart. Interestingly, and they've translated it wisdom or sense. But he who gets a heart loves his own soul. In other words, he who gets clarity in his inner man is what it's really trying to say. And that's wisdom, that's sense, right? But that's really what it's trying to say. If you get that clarity, if you get wisdom, if you get Christ, right? You get clarity in your inner soul. That shows that you love your soul, that you love yourself, that you pay attention to what is important. And then the second part, he who keeps understanding, or he who guards understanding, will find good, right? He guards it, he protects it. And then that last word, he who will find good. Flip back a minute to chapter 16. We had this whole section on the good in chapter 16, verse 20. Mine says, he who heeds the word wisely will find good. And then if you remember in the verses that followed it, there were explanations what it meant by good. It was in the next part of verse 20, whoever trusts in the Lord will be happy. Verse 21 will be prudent. In the end of 21, he increases learning. 22, he is a wellspring of life to others. Verse 23 is he teaches with his mouth. Pleasant are his words, right? So this is what it means, good. He who keeps understanding, he who has wisdom in his heart, right? He will find good. He will find success. He will find what God wants for him. Verse 9 is kind of a repeat of verse 5. False witness goes unpunished. False witness will not go unpunished. He who speaks lies shall perish. I'm not going to say anything else about it. Verse 10, luxury is not fitting for a fool, much less for a servant to rule over princes. Luxury is not fitting, in other words, not good, right? It's not successful if you have luxury that is attached to a fool. So luxury or a life of pleasure is not fitting. And then the second part, much less a servant to rule over princes. Now, the implication here is a unwise servant to rule over princes, because if you flip back to chapter 17, verse 2, it says a wise servant will rule over a son who causes shame and will share in an inheritance among the brothers. So here again, in chapter 19, verse 10, when it talks about a servant, it's not good for a servant to rule over princes. It's really the implication there is it's not good for an unwise servant, one who does not follow the principles, one who does not know God, one who does not know Christ. Right? Again, it's not so much about the servant ruling over the prince. It's about whether you know Christ and whether you're wise or not. Verse 11, the discretion of a man makes him slow to anger, and his glory is to overlook a transgression. So I need you to put an asterisk by that one. We talked about this a little bit last week and the week before, both. What did I miss something?
Oh, Tim was just.
I was showing her I already have an answer.
Already have an asterisk, yeah.
Woo, it rarely happens.
Gold stars, right.
I probably told you that asterisk it before. But discretion of a man makes him slow to anger. We've talked about this before, but does somebody use the word prudence there in that verse? So it's the same thing. Prudence, right? Discretion, insight, prudence. Prudence, if you remember, is wisdom and practice. Makes him patient, makes him slow to anger. I'm going to have you flip to a bunch of different verses here for a little bit, because I want to park here for a minute. First of all, go to James chapter 1. James chapter 1, verse 19. Mine says, so then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Well, if we could just learn that one, we'd be okay, right? The wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Slow to speak, swift to hear, slow to wrath. Going back to Proverbs now. His glory is to overlook a transgression. His glory is to overlook a offense. That's the word I really want to talk about for a minute. Offense, taking offense. And again, we talked about this a little bit last time, but let me ask this question. When do we take offense? When is that you take offense?
Something against us.
We're harmed.
What practical situations when that happens? I have that one written down. So So that jumped into your head without any problem. That's good. So why do we take offense? So. The other words, why do we take offense? Those are good words.
Are there other ones?
Selfishness.
We
So they
have an
don't agree
agenda.
with what we think.
We have an agenda.
Because we're important, we're more important than anyone else.
Yeah.
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 Like when I get offended when Joe can't get her medical fees.
I wrote down like, we deserve better than that, whatever that is, right? Or, that person has no right to say that or do that.
Don't we get offended when we know we're wrong? It's like we're directing our frustration that should be directed at ourselves and other.
Back to blaming God for your own foolishness, right?
The speck in the brother's eye, right? We've got a beam in our own. So
Sometimes too, it's the temperament. And some people fire more, get violently angry. I think you have to work on that versus other people have other issues, it's just, there's some wiring there that have different things that we,
Yeah. Turn to Proverbs 29. Proverbs 29, verse 25. 29:25. Mine says, the fear of man brings a snare. 29:25. I can't hear. The fear of man, if we're afraid of what someone says, rather than trusting in the Lord, right, then we're going to be all bent out of shape by what they say. Fear of man. So instead of turning to all these places, remember Jesus, right? They slapped him, they spit on him. Was he offended?
Still have compassion.
In Philippians, it says he humbled himself, right? Taking on this form. I remember, some of you remember the Bill Gothard stuff years ago. There was this whole section on us claiming our rights, right? We have the right to be treated nicely, right? We have the right to be treated fairly. We have the right to be treated with respect. We have the right to be honored for our effort. We have the right to nice things. We have the right to good relationships. We have the right to health. And actually, what is it that we deserve?
Yeah.
Death, right? And everything above that is a gift. But we get so frustrated when things don't go our way. And we take offense at when something happens. Taking offense, getting angry should be a red flag to us. That we're holding on to something about ourselves that we think is so important that we got to release. We got to let go and let God have it. And if you can get there, then no one can hurt you. No one can offend you. Everything's a blessing. In Matthew, in chapter 5, it also says that, that it rains on the just and the unjust. Okay. I'm going to come back to that a little later, but Proverbs chapter 19, verse 11. Verse 12. The king's wrath is like the roaring of a lion, but his favor is like dew on the grass. So this is the opposite side of that, right? That is, God is going to take care of those things, not you. You don't need to take offense. You don't need to try to hit back, right? God's the roaring lion, right? His wrath is going to take care of it. His favor is towards you, right? Like the dew of the grass. His favor is sweet. Let God take care of it. Verse 13. A foolish son is the ruin of his father, and the contentions of a wife are a continual dripping. So you know this is where I'm going to get in trouble, right?
Yeah. Be careful.
So let me just say, I had this all studied and ready before this morning, when Joe and I had a little
What did she
spit,
do?
and it was exactly what Kevin said, right? Where she yelled at me for doing something which I knew I should have done, right? And so then I'm angry because I knew I should have done it, but of course she is the one who brings it up. So put that aside. This was all here before we had that little spiff this morning. It's hard to believe that we still do that, right? Where am I?
13.
A foolish son is ruined to his father, and contentious wife a continual dripping. A foolish son brings destruction quickly, whereas a contentious wife brings it slowly. Right? The thing I would say, and the thing I had written down before this morning, was I would ask the wife, why are you dripping? Right? Is it for you, or is it for him? Right? That's an important question. Is it for your pride? Is it for your control? Or is it actually something that needs to be done, needs to be said? So I would you got to be careful with that, right? Because the contentious wives are continual dripping, and the point is it is ruin to the father, just like what the son is doing. As I said this morning, I was in Kevin's camp. So the other thing there, though, is you got to balance that with verse 11, right, which says discretion of a man makes him slow to anger. No matter the continuous dripping, your response has still got to be slow to anger, regardless. Not the way I responded this morning. Verse 14. Houses and riches are an inheritance from a father, but a prudent wife is from the Lord, right? So this is going right back to what we said in chapter 18, verse 22, a prudent wife is from the Lord, right? He who finds a wife finds a good thing. And sometimes a wise wife says contentious things, and you need her to say those, right? But one of the first leadership meeting, wherever I used to work, I went to a leadership training one time, and they said, if you bring in somebody into your group and you guys agree all the time, one of you is not necessary. Right? I mean, the whole point is to actually have a relationship where you can improve and learn and grow. Verse 15. Laziness casts one into a deep sleep, and an idle person will suffer hunger. This really is connected back to verse 14, and I didn't point it out, right? But houses and riches are an inheritance from the father, right? In verse 13, a foolish son is the ruin of his father. And the point is that he ruins his wealth, he ruins his inheritance. And this is the way that he does it. Laziness casts one into a deep sleep. An idle person will suffer hunger. A foolish son is lazy and idle, and therefore the destruction comes. And what's interesting is the lazy person, not only is this just about physical things, but also about spiritual things, right? They're unconcerned with their temporal or their eternal good. They're idle, and they suffer hunger. They suffer loss. All right, verse 16. Somebody needs to wave their hand at me. Oh my gosh, we got all kinds of time. I'm going so fast. So,
Being in person makes a world of difference.
do what?
Being in person makes it.
It doesn't? Okay, good. Verse 16, no, we're doing great. He who keeps the commandment keeps his soul, but he who is careless of his ways will die. So this is again, this is a new section. This is the educational proverb up front, which says essentially listen to these proverbs. They're important, right? He who keeps the commandment will keep his soul, and he who is careless of his way or he is uncommitted will die, right? Will not have eternal life. That's what he's really saying. Verse 17. Verse 17, we begin a conversation on the economy of God. It says, he who has pity on the poor lends to God, and he will pay back what he has given. Grace given to the poor is a loan to God. And God then owes you a payback in a strange kind of way, right? He will pay you back what has been given. God will pay you back for the grace that you give to the poor. One strange statement I'm going to say here is God made the poor. God made the poor poor. If he's in charge of all things, and he decides that there are going to be people who are poor, God made the poor poor. Now, God's also watching over the poor to look for who's going to help them. He's waiting for you to reach out to the poor, I believe strongly. God made the poor. Part of the reason he made the poor, part of the reason he made the poor was such to give us an opportunity to have them as part of the family, to reach out to them. Just think there's a message through all of this that we need to hear. As you help them, you're giving grace to God. You're worshiping God. He's taking that as a gift. He's taking that as a gift to him, and he's going to pay that back. This is not a new message. Go back to chapter 14. Verse 21. He despises his neighbor's sins, but he who has mercy on the poor, happy is he. Same chapter, verse 31. He who oppresses the poor reproaches his maker. He who honors him has mercy on the needy. Right? He who oppresses the poor reproaches his maker. He made them. And you're reproaching God if you oppress them. Go on to chapter 22. Verse 9. 22:9. He who has a generous eye will be blessed, for he gives of his bread to the poor. Chapter 28, verse 27. He who gives to the poor will not lack, but he who hides his eyes will have many curses. He who hides his eyes, he who sees but doesn't see, will have many curses. Psalm chapter 41. Psalm 41, verse 1. Blessed is he who considers the poor. The Lord will deliver him in time of trouble. The Lord will preserve him and keep him alive, and he will be blessed on the earth. He will not deliver him to the will of his enemies. The Lord will strengthen him on the bed of illness. He will sustain him on his sick bed. That's a lot of good stuff. What does he ask us? Blessed is he who considers the poor. And then, of course, Matthew chapter 25. I knew we'd get to Matthew eventually. Matthew chapter 25, verse 35. Right? For I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you took me in. I was naked, you clothed me. I was sick, you visited me. I was in prison, you came to me. And then skip down to verse 40. And the king will answer and say to them, surely I say to you, as much as you did it to the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. And then Luke chapter 6. Luke chapter 6, verse 38. This is crazy. Give and it will be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, be put in your bosom. With the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you. And man, we don't believe that at all. We don't believe that. Give and it will be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, put into your bosom. Same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you. We just don't believe it. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. But this is God's economy. This is the way he works. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, is that what I said?
Yes.
Verse 9. This is just an interesting twist on all this. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that you through his poverty might become rich. Now, of course, we understand this as he was in heaven. He gave up everything to come down here, right? In order to save us such that we could have heavenly. But there's also, he could have came down as anything. He decided to come down as essentially a beggar. I mean, he didn't own anything. He didn't have anything. He went around and got stuff from everybody else. Just find it, he could have come down as a king. He could have come down as a prince or a head rabbi. He didn't. And again, God created the poor. God decided to come down poor. And the reaction to the people around him was, oh my gosh, this guy, not him. He's not the king. No way, right?
Rich,
Yeah.
so we were just finishing watching some of the last few episodes of The Last Chosen. And during one of those episodes, him and Jesus and his mother were talking. And she made a comment, and this is just chosen, but
Yeah.
made a comment about how her and Joseph sometimes would choose who was going to eat that day or something. I forget exactly how it was, but it was something that I hadn't really crossed my mind, that they were that poor. Kind of like what you were saying.
Yeah. I just think we don't think about it that way. We think of this, eternal kingdom, blah, blah, blah stuff, which is important. But we also need to recognize he was poor. He came down intentionally was a poor person.
I just hadn't even thought about being that poor.
Yeah.
That they possibly could have been meal to meal.
And then the last one in James chapter 2. And these are all verses so it's not like a big surprise I'm bringing to you, but trying to bring them together. James chapter 2, verse 5. It says, listen, my beloved brethren, has God not chosen the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, which he promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor, but you oppress and drag him into court, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. There's more there than we pay attention to, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And we need to pay attention. Back to Proverbs. Wherever we are, 18. Hasten your son while there is hope. Do not set your heart on his destruction. Read this together with verse 19. The two are similar message. A man of great wrath will suffer punishment, but if you rescue him, you will have to do it again. So in the first one, chasten your son while there is hope, right? And do not set your heart on his destruction. What that really says in the second part is, if you set your heart on him instead of chastening him, that's going to go to his destruction, right? If you're, and verse 19 even says it better. If you rescue him, you're going to have to do it again, right? Instead of chastening him, instead of bringing punishment. Now, in verse 19 also, a man of great wrath or a man of great passion or a hothead, okay, will get punishment. And if you rescue him from that punishment, you're gonna have to do it again. And back to verse 18, it's going to be to his destruction by not chastening him, by not punishing. You're going to save him from the consequences. And you're going to have to do it again and again and again. Isn't it cool that that's in here? Verse 20. Listen to counsel and receive instruction that you may be wise in your later days. Now he's focusing his attention on the son instead of the parent here, right? He's saying that, accept the discipline. And then you'll be counted as wise in your later days, right? In the end, you'll be counted with the wise. You'll be counted as wise. Verse 21. There are many plans in a man's heart. Nevertheless, the Lord's counsel, that will stand. What I like to think about this one is there's a lot of stuff going on in your head, right? You're thinking about work, you're thinking about golf, you're thinking about what I'm going to have for lunch, right? You're thinking about, something going on in your family, right? God's only thinking about one thing, and that's your progression as a child of his, right? We got all this other stuff. We spend so little time actually thinking about, I really need to progress in my relationship with God. That's all he's thinking about. How can I help him progress? How can I move him forward towards me? Many plans in man's heart, but the Lord's counsel, that will stand. That's the only one that actually is important and makes sense for the long term. Verse 22, what is desired in a man is kindness, and a poor man is better than a liar. This is kind of a summary of this section. But what is desired of a man is kindness, right? So some viewers may say what is desirable in a man is kindness, which is really a better translation of this. So what we desire of a man is kindness. What we desire of another person is kindness, is what it's really saying here. And a poor man with kindness is better than a liar. That's not written in yours, but that's what it means, right? A poor man with kindness is better than a liar. It's not that a poor man is better to be poor than a liar. It's better to be poor with kindness than a liar. That's what he's trying to get across. All right. We start a new section here. I'm thinking, good time to stop? Yes? Yeah, sure. Feel like there was a thread through this one. Felt like it to me. I just read through these things and I keep going, and then I'm just like, wow, those are all connected. There's a lesson there about the poor and our relationship to them. There's two key messages in this to me. This relationship about the poor and how we should think about them and how we should not avert our eyes and how we should. It's our responsibility. We were born for this time to help them, right? All of that stuff that was in chapter 17. And then this other message about taking offense. I think it's just so important that because the world is all about taking offense, right? If you want to be different from the world, don't. You'll stand out. All right. Prayer request time. Oh, is anybody online? Just me? Could you please stop the recording?
Know that guy.
You, oh, you.